Today's guest is the founder and CEO of a marketing agency serving over 110,000 workers across Canada and US with a team of just 28 people. This is his fourth agency with 3 successful exits, including one that grew to over 400 staff and 100 million in revenue.
Burning bridges when people come and go, it's just a bad strategy. And if you take it personally, you're going to be upset.
But what makes this story interesting is the choice he made to build a lean team and scale revenue without scaling headcount. It's how he survived 2 years of complete shutdown during the pandemic and is the philosophy he's built across 30 years in the industry.
We really learned that the remote worker was suffering from not having that cultural aspect.
So in this episode, we'll talk about how we grow without scaling headcount, how to think about your exit from day one, and how to protect your team from client chaos. Kevin, welcome to Agency Culture Conversations.
Perfect. Thank you, Wesley. I appreciate that.
Of course. Super excited to have a conversation with you today. So I really appreciate you for your time. Now, before we dive into the podcast, would you mind letting myself and the listener know a bit about your story, your background, and how did you start the current agency?
Sure. That'd be my pleasure. Yeah, I'm in my mid 50s now and, coming out of the university world, decided to get into this experiential marketing industry, which was very early of this whole industry. It was in the late 80s, 1988 specifically. And I saw this huge opportunity. There was no other agencies. There was no really third parties doing what we do today in this exciting industry. And so that was the launch pad to several different agencies. Lucky to have had, to ride the wave of this growing industry. And now it's commonplace, and a big bucket of marketing dollars is now attributed to this versus, in 1988, it was about radio, print, and TV. And so, experiential marketing has boomed. I've been on the backside of that, luckily, to ride those waves, and it's been great. I think, with my former agencies, one of the big lessons is dealing with human capital can often be difficult. And we all face that in our agencies. And, on great days, human capital is amazing. And when things go wrong, for a variety of reasons, it's very problematic. And so, the foundation of why I started Karma was 30 years of industry knowledge of understanding human capital and specifically talent in the marketplace, where they excel and where they find loopholes and where they sometimes leave you hanging with your clients. And you're quite exposed, and your clients at the end of the day, see that impression and then decide that whether or not you're a good partner or not, because you've got some tactical relationship with a talent member in a certain city that decided not to show up. And so, you spend all this effort securing clients, and then you rely on others to help you deliver it. And so I saw an opportunity to use digital tools, much like Uber came into the industry not long ago, 10 years ago, and disrupted a marketplace using digital innovation of an existing marketplace. And that's the foundation of what Karma is. It's using a digital tool to promote those human capital assets in the best way possible. But also equally important is closing those loopholes so you don't feel exposed when you're relying on them to deliver for your clients. And that really is the premise of Karma and how we got here to today.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think you're absolutely right. I think the traditional agency model is scaling headcount because it's a service-based type of business and it's relying so much on the human capital. So I actually want to start the first question with your business model. There are agencies that grow by just hiring more people. So I'm curious, what is your thought process or your philosophy behind staying lean as you grow? And what have you actually built into the company so that it could scale without headcount?
Well, that's great. I mean, in the last decade, we've seen so many platforms, digital platforms launch. You can see a lot of these platforms, some of them don't even make any revenue, but they're worth tremendous amounts of money. And you've seen examples where they've overinvested in human capital and, talent, and they right size or downsize as they go through those waves. And you've seen others that seem to be able to grow exponentially and have a very lean team. And so I've seen both examples in the marketplace. And I think, when I layer in my own personal experience of having a large $100 million agency with 400 full-time people, having that kind of headcount started to be problematic. And so I didn't want to do that again, and have really focused in on how do you drive results? How do you grow an agency and have the best team possible? Because we all desire that, but I don't want to have a lot of heads. And so that forces a lot of different types of behavior. One is on recruitment. How do you find the right people to come into your agency that understand scale is priority, but redundancy and duplication of job efforts are not, and definitely held accountable for your decisions. And you're a key player in the success of this business. You're not just an employee. You're not just a staff. You're not going to be reporting to a director who's going to be reporting to another person, reporting to another person. So our organizational design, it's not just flat, because a lot of organizations will say, oh, we're flat. We are flat. However, we're accountable. And that's the big difference, is not having redundancy, duplication of work effort. People are accountable to deliver what they need to deliver. That only works when you've got the right leadership and you really support and trust people to do that and allow them to make those mistakes, but also that you've got the right digital tools. Because when you knock out redundancy or layers of management, you also become a little bit more exposed. So if somebody were to get ill, or the saying of get hit by a bus, which we never hope for, how do you make sure you don't lose the content and the relationships? So putting in other layers of digital tools to trap all of the information, record the information, understand every email that's gone out, understand relationships, is really pivotal. And so with the right recruitment, but I would say more importantly, the right cultural structure of design, and having digital assets would be that third component that allows you to scale, not feel exposed with your clients, and have the right capacity within your team to be able to take on that incremental growth.
That's awesome. Just out of curiosity, is your agency mainly remote, or is it hybrid, or is it mostly in person?
Yeah, we are post-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we were in person. Post-pandemic, we are remote, 100% remote, but also layer in that we've expanded geographically rapidly. So even having an in-person office structure now would not work for us. We've got people all across the US, all across Canada, and we're not looking to, add all these office infrastructures in all those different markets. So people would previously, in other agencies, you have the head office, and then you've got all these other people who live in home offices. And they would always feel a little distant. They're like, oh, all that fun is happening at the head office. They get to go play shuffleboard and have a beer at the end of the day and do all those fun things. And we really learned that the remote worker was suffering from not having that cultural aspect. And we felt that our design of social tools, organizational, like things going on in the company, in the office, were just targeted to people in the office. And once in a while, you'd send a gift card off to the remote office or a box of chocolates or send them out for dinner, which was fine, but it's not the same. It really wasn't the same. It wasn't a level playing field, and it was negatively affecting the culture. And so forced by hand and some good decisions, post-pandemic, we decided not to reopen the office. That was a financial decision that turned out. And when we made that decision, I polled all of our employees and asked, what do you guys want to do with this? And everybody said, we all want to work remote. So I engaged them on the decision, but my decision was really quite forced financially because of the circumstance of the pandemic. After the pandemic, we're all remote. And now we're building social programs and cultural aspects targeted to everybody who are remote. We do have a shared office, like a Regis space. And we do try to pull people together in every market that we are in. So it's different. It is something interesting to manage, but we do have social plans and social committees who are working, for those remote workers and keeping everybody on the same playing field. And then we do have in-person meetings. We try to do those, not everybody quarterly, but for sure quarterly on a regional basis. And then every year we have our AGM, our annual general meeting, where we fly in everybody from all four corners, and we spend 3 or 4 or 5 days together and really rah that up and build that culture from that standpoint.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to go a little bit deeper into accountability because it's very difficult to build an accountability process or system around a remote team. I know you briefly mentioned a little bit about hiring the right people and having the right leadership in place, but from like the weekly days, from like a daily and weekly basis, what are some of the things that you do with your team to make sure that everyone is accountable for the action, for the task, and for client resource as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it for us is transparency and communication. So putting those fundamental pillars to work. So every Tuesday, no, actually it's every Monday, we have an all hands on deck meeting. So everybody dials into that. It is mandatory. And it's not just, the senior leaders standing up pontificating about what's going on in the company. It's actually the people doing the work and giving us a 5-minute quick overview of what's working, what's not working, where do we need help, where are the bottlenecks in the system. And it is quite tactical in nature, but our business is quite tactical when you've got clients and demands every single week, every single day. And so that has been a step change. We used to do a monthly town hall, but that was really the leaders pontificating about, well, how's our revenue doing? How's our margin doing? Like it was very high level stuff. And we've flipped that model into an all hands, quite tactical. We will still have our strategy sessions, but week to week, holding people accountable in front of their peer group, led by them, has been a great step change on making sure that we are delivering what we need to deliver to our clients. So transparency and communication. And the team now embodies that accountability. And it's not the leaders telling them to do that. It's them doing it, which is a big change.
That's amazing. Now, most agency founders say that they want to stay lean, they want to keep the headcount small, but few really actually commit to it. So I'm curious about the actual outcome for your agency. Maybe you can give a bit of a insight on what does that do to you when you keep the team relatively small? What does that actually buy you in terms of margin, in terms of cultures, and maybe in terms of the kind of agency that you get to run?
I think there's pros and cons to it, is the honest answer. I mean, from a pro standpoint, a small or a leaner team, you're more personable. You can react quicker. There is less drama. There is, you can do more fun things. I took the team away down in Mexico, and we do fun things when you're a smaller group because you can afford to do these things. It gives you flexibility, a little bit more flexibility on compensation. And so when you run a leaner machine, it does yield, I find on the pro side, better results because you're closer to the action and you're closer to the people. So I've had that experience. I think there are some cons to that small lean team too, which is you become pretty reliant on the people. And if one of them decides to change their role or find a better job somewhere else, that hits hard. It hits harder because we don't have the redundancy or the backup per se in a traditional company. And so you do fight some fires, when there's changes that happen, and changes do happen in every business. And so that happens. But I think part of our cultural aspect is we support people in good times and bad. And if somebody woke up and said, look, this isn't the right fit for me, I'll be the first one to support them, give them a reference, help them network and find them the right role, even if it's not within our agency. Burning bridges when people come and go is it's just a bad strategy. And if you take it personally, you're going to be upset. You can't take it personally. It's not about you, the person. It's about their role. At the end of the day, everybody needs to be happy. It's not a dress rehearsal. We all live one life. Some believe others, but we're on this planet once. And so make the best of it. And if it's not the right platform for you, then go find a different one. And we should support that and enthuse with it. So I don't know if I've answered your question as you designed. Some of the other benefits of, a lean team, is for sure, the margin side, again, that can be either good or bad, because when you keep a lean team, that means hopefully you've built tenure. As you build tenure, you now build annual expectations and compensation expectations that keep going up and up because you're building up a base. Sometimes when you're bringing in new talent, they might not be at the high end of the range. You can bring them in a little bit lower, and then they're going to expect increases as time progresses. And so being lean, again, has got pros and cons to it. I enjoy it because of all the other aspects of culture, fun, and control and transparency. But it does come with some hiccups.
Have you ever had a situation where somebody in your team had a different offer from a different company and you really have to bring in somebody within the next 2 weeks? And I'm curious, if so, how do you make sure that you hire an A player? How do you have the right person within that such a small time frame?
Yeah, that's aggressive and it's real. So I've lived it. I'm living it. It happens. And so one is, I pride ourselves on always forward thinking of who's on the bench. Anticipate change. Anticipate the people who you think will never change are going to change. You cannot rely on that fact. Again, earlier to my earlier comment, people change and life circumstances change, geography change, things change. And so be prepared for it. So work on your bench, make sure you've got that next person in line. Hopefully you can promote within, but have them ready. And that's where I think the non-redundancy and accountability really come into play, because if somebody more senior to them decided to leave, they should be able to roll into that next role without a tidal wave of new information, because they've been participating every single week. They've been listening to the updates. They've been, actively involved with some of those solutions. So building the bench is really important, and having that next person. Networking, you've got to always have that turned on. Like, I am forever always looking at our competitors, looking at the industry, reaching out on LinkedIn to people when I see them in a certain role, even though I may not be looking for them, and just building that network. And so when you've got, a short-term gap that you need to fill, I think it's unrealistic that you're going to fill it in 2 weeks with an A player. Like, that's pretty aggressive if you do it externally. Internally is your best option. In my view, it's your best option because you already know, trust, and they're already familiar with your processes and your management and your culture. So I would focus heavily on building the bench internally first. And if that's not available, depending on what the role is, then you've got to go external. And there you've got to really build quick trust and confidence. Hard to build trust in 2 weeks. And you can only do that through, really deep dives on interviews and references, and not just say, did you do reference checks? No, like real references. And talking to as many people as you can to get a scope of this person, their capability. And one of my big beliefs is, if I've interviewed them, great. And if our presidents interviewed them, that's great. I want our team, who they're going to be accountable to interview them. I want the people who are going to report to that person involved in the process and really get a feel for the cultural fit, and can this person lead this group of people to success? And their voice on that process is equally important as it is for me. And so that's the way I would attempt to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. There's a saying in the agency world, which is ABH, always be hiring. So I think it's right aligned with the philosophy that you have there.
Totally agree.
I do want to deep dive into hiring, because it seems like your agency has two different type of roles that you're hiring into. Of course, one is the management team and one is the individual contributors. So do you hire differently between those two groups? If so, how?
Yeah, in the nature of our business, we do. We've got our internal management group, which you referenced, Wesley, about 28 people. So they'll call that internal management, full-time employees of the business. So that is, hiring for that group of people is very different than the other group. So with this group, it is what I just talked about. You'll always be hiring. It's networking, it's interviewing, it's doing outbound strategies. You're really focusing at first their experience, and then very quickly, for me, equally important to experience is their cultural fit. Every time you add somebody to your culture, it's like an amoeba. It changes. And so culture to me is half of the topic of when we're interviewing and bringing people into the company. I really want to get into their situational aspect. How are they in life? How do people describe them? What do they do for hobbies? What do they do for fun? Is that going to fit within what we expect as a business and as also colleagues? Is that a cultural fit? So that's a lot of outwards. That's a lot of interviewing. That's a lot of reference checks. It's a lot of social media checks. It's all of those things that you would typically do. I don't think we're totally innovative on the strategies of how we do that. I do think that we put a huge emphasis on cultural fit, and maybe more so than other organizations. And a lot of people will say it. I think we walk the talk on that one. It's really important. I just had a business opportunity come at me late last week, and they were pretty excited to move forward. And before we would do that, I jumped on a plane, flew from Toronto to Las Vegas to have dinner, and flew back that red-eye night. And why did I do that? It didn't change the outcome of the discussion. It was me reading the table as, could we actually do this together on a cultural fit basis? So that's how important it is to me, and how we do that in the business. I think with the other group of people, which I will call our talent, these are the experiential marketing, brand ambassadors, and retail sales representatives, the 110,000 that are across Canada and the United States. That's a little different for us because we're a tech platform, kind of like Uber. It's typically inbound. So people are hearing about our app, they're downloading our app, they're creating profiles, and then our technology is that first wave of interface to see if they're the right fit and if they're the right fit for a certain program, depending on what that client program is about. So it's a lot different, actually. It's inbound versus outbound. Management is outbound. And once the talent come into our system, then we have humans go through and validate their digital profile with them in person. So it's more reactionary than it is proactive, whereas the other group is definitely proactive. So different set of circumstance, different process to do it, totally leverage digital tools.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So it seems like you focus more on the people, the culture, when you're looking into bringing on a management team member. And on the flip side, you focus more on the skill set when you're looking to hire an IC. Now, I do notice that a lot of agency, their hiring process is focusing more on the skill set itself. So I guess like, how do you know whether or not somebody is a good person in terms of cultural fit for your team? What kind of questions do you add? How do you walk through the process to ensure you're bringing on the right person for the leadership team?
From a cultural perspective?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the right? I love this. This is very, very scientific. It's gut. It's gut. What is the decision? So most of it for me is a gut call. And how do you determine is this a good gut call or not? I have the luxury of having 30 years experience of interviewing thousands of people. And so I think I've got this opportunity that I can make decisions. Is it always right? It's not always right. But making a gut call as a leader is an important skill to have. And I think with the gut call, I can only do that after a number of things that have happened. So one is that they've met with multiple senior leaders in our company, and I share in all of their feedback and take that to heart. Two, that they've met with the people who are going to report into that person. And I also, equally important, have their feedback of how this is going to work, and will they respond, and will that person have the right leadership? And so those are, some of that is skill, but a lot of this is cultural fit, because again, if they're meeting with somebody more junior, that person is not going to be grilling them on their, recent project success and what kind of ROI did you deliver to the clients. They're not really talking about skills. They're actually trying to get to know the person in a very short environment. And so the things we really focus in on is, your friend group. We look at your social medias. We see what you're doing on social media. We see what you do for hobbies. We can see if you're, an athlete, or you're a book reader, or you want to go to the theater, or you're going to EDM concerts. And all of those would be positive or negatives. It doesn't really matter, but we want to get a flavor of, how do you spend your extracurricular time? Where in this marketing industry, often we're pushed after hours and we're pushed into weekends. And so that is usually a call out that we try to find out what is their ability to adjust to the client demands in our industry. And you do that through those techniques. I think the other important one is communication style. How do you, in all the conversations and the hours that myself and others and our team invest into this, is how do they communicate? And is it logical? Does it flow? Do they speak? It doesn't have to be our karma language, but it certainly should be industry language, so they can hit the ground running. And if somebody has got zero experience in our industry, that's a tough one. That really is a tough one, because as you referenced earlier, often you don't have a lot of lead time before the next project is hitting the ground running. And so there should be, in our case, a nice foundational level of knowledge. It just makes that whole process easier. And I've seen a big difference as an agency owner. If you've been in the agency industry, you walk it, you understand it, you speak the language. It might be slightly different, but you get it. If you only have ever been client side, they don't speak the same language, and they've always been the boss, and they don't fret over the small details and the evenings and the weekends, and it's just a different style. And so that often is an area that we would really drill in on to see if that person could adapt to the agency world, or if they can't. And I've seen examples of both for sure, more so coming from the client side.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious, what are some of the red flags that you see in a candidate and you're just like, no, this person is not the right person for the management team?
Yeah, I would say there's two that jump out to me. If somebody speaks too corporate, they use the words like boss, or, my direct reports, or I, and you, like that's not the team player we're looking for. And even in our culture, boss is a 4-letter word. And I really encourage our team not to use those words. Everybody's got a different responsibility, a different accountability. We work together, we support each other. Our whole theme this year and previous years is Ted Lasso and Believe. And it's believing in each other, and it's believing that we can get the work done even when it's difficult. And so if somebody comes into the fold and they're too corporate, it's not going to work out. We're very entrepreneurial. We make quick decisions. We don't have a lot of processes. We don't have an SOP for this and an SOP. We have some SOP, standard operating procedures, but we don't have it on every aspect of our business. And we don't want them on every aspect of our business, because some of these things are entrepreneurial calls that you have to make quick decisions on. And as long as you've got that foundation of training, which our team spends a lot of time on, then you're going to make the right decision.
That's awesome. I'm still processing that for a second, because I think it's the first time I've heard somebody say you don't need an SOP for every aspect of the business. And I think so far in the agency space, it's been taught that you need to have SOP for everything. But I'm curious where did that philosophy coming from?
Being nimble, making quick decisions. But it's the ebbs and flows of this agency industry that change so rapidly. I mean, we do have SOPs, and those are on some fundamental things that as a new person comes into the company, that they understand, here's our process for doing these types of processes. But it's pretty tough to have an SOP on how do you effectively problem solve when you don't know what the problem is. And every project we do with clients can have its own set of unique problems. You can have a foundation of problem solving. You can have a foundation of, you could talk to somebody else in your industry, talk to somebody else on the team. You can, set a bunch of expectations. But if you get thrown a curveball, how is an SOP going to deliver on that? So that's, and I'm just trying to think of an example to give you. And, there's hundreds of wild ones, from people. You can have rules in place, you can have training or organizations in place, but you have to rely on your people to be able to follow those and execute those. And as soon as they don't, you're in a new set of rules. So yeah, SOPs on foundational pillars of our business, but not on every aspect.
Awesome. I do want to transition into a slightly different topic. So let's say if you are an IC, you're an individual contributor, and you are looking to get that promotion. What does that path looks like? Like, how do you, help pave that path for that person? Or what are some of the criteria that person need to meet before moving into a manager position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say of our bench today, 85 to 90% of the people who are now at our senior level, our directors, even mid-management, have all come through our system, all of them. We had one person that we hired outside of our system last year, and it didn't work out. It was like 8 or 9 months and just didn't understand our industry and all the stuff that I just talked about. So I think that's the first and paramount thing, which is recruit within and promote within. And how do you do that? And how do you get them to feel that accountability? It's communication and transparency. So every person in our company, we have an annual PDP, performance development plan, and that is developed between the manager and the talent member. And they develop it, they co-develop it, they co-authorize it. They're allowed to agree, disagree, challenge it. If they want to, if they can't align on it, then there is a process to do that. But we haven't seen somebody who's not been alignment on it yet. And then we have, regular monthly updates on their PDPs. And we certainly have quarterly reviews, and then you have an annual review. But because we have our all hands on deck, we get weekly snapshot as to what things are going. And there's a bunch of key pillars you could put in corporate objectives. I think as the CEO, you talk revenue, you talk profitability or EBITDA and gross margin. We also talk about compliance, and compliance for us is when a company hires us to deliver 100 people for 100 days, that we're delivering 100 people for 100 days. And so we measure compliance against those objectives. We've been running at 99% compliance for 10 years. That's 1.3 million field hours. That's over 9,500 projects that we've delivered for clients, and we deliver 99% compliance. When they hire us, we deliver what we say. So why is that important? Because it's probably the number one target that everyone in our company has to hit, and we report it every single week. We look at our dashboard project by project every single week. Every conversation, every case study, everything we do talks about compliance. And that to us is the indicator of, are you able to do your job, do it well, using the tools that we've developed, a lot of digital tools through the Karma app. And so that's the first metric. So accountability, but transparency is really important. So there is no place to hide. If you're falling down on an area of the business, or you don't have the skill, you need more training, it's going to be visible pretty quickly within a week or two, if you can't deliver on that. And if you can't deliver on it, now we've got a focused effort on training, getting you exposure and building you up so you can deliver on that. We just don't have months and months can go by. We can't fail. And so I think it's a little bit probably easier in our industry because the metrics are so black and white. There's other metrics, of course, but it is pretty black and white, is whether or not you staffed a person to do a role or you didn't. Like, at the end of the day, that's it.
Yeah, I think it all goes back to accountability and communication. But I'm curious, have you had a situation where like a senior team member perhaps, and they are doing so good at their job, A player, but they just don't have that management criteria?
Yes, I've got lots of examples over my tenure of those situations. And it's like the proverbial example. And I remember in one of my agencies, I had this amazing VP of sales. Amazing. So good. Could sell anything. The problem was he was a disaster internally. Broke every process, didn't follow any SOPs, didn't fill in paperwork, or didn't record things into the CRM. Everybody was guessing. Accounting couldn't work with him. Finance couldn't work with him. He would say the craziest things, so HR couldn't work with him. It was a disaster internally. The problem we had was he was over delivering on all of his revenue targets. And so it was a very difficult, combative situation. At the end of the day, we had to terminate him. It was the right decision, but it was a hard decision because he was over delivering on his sales, which was his primary role. But you cannot be a Tasmanian devil when you come internally and upset the apple cart. And that's what he was doing every time. And so a difficult decision, had to make it. And it turned out to be the right decision because now 30 people felt relief and could do things differently. And now we could take those lessons for the next person to come in. Now, I tell you, the next person that came in did not deliver the same results. They didn't. Everybody liked them better, followed the process. And so now it's funny. I've taken that lesson and used that, your best salesperson is probably your worst admin person. But if you go into that with that knowledge, then don't expect things and don't even put it into the plan. Find a different way to get the information the company needs so they can harness in on their skill set. I've got other situations, current and past, where, some people would really thrive under, at this leader in the company. But that leader became very possessive. And their little fiefdom and only supported that group of people and would not really put their hands out to say, I can help another group of people, I can do that, and really protected the group. Now, the people in the group felt amazing that their leader cared so much for them. But all the other groups were like, what is going on? We cannot even talk to that group. They don't want to, interact. And it was tearing the company apart because of the leader doing such a good job for their people, but not having the foresight to look across the organization and say, no, you're a leader of the company. You're not a leader of your little fiefdom. And, these little cliques can easily happen in companies. And, I would say you got to nip that in the butt as quickly as you can, because it can become quite toxic. And then I've seen it becomes toxic.
I think there's a lot of agency leaders and founders who's sitting on a decision right now whether or not they should let go of somebody who is just not following procedures and SOPs, but they are such a key player. What do you have to say to those folks? Maybe a bit of an example on like what happened to the company right after you fire VP of sales too.
Yeah. Well, those are good questions. I'll share a personal experience for me. I like to like people, and I'm fairly extroverted. I like to know everybody on the team. I actually like hanging out with them. I like to do stuff. And so I become personable. And as soon as somebody isn't warm about that, I kind of get my back up. I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to move on and not spend my time there. But it keeps me up at night. I don't like that. I want people in my organizations to respect and like me as a person, and value the work I do as much as I want to value the work that they do. There's one situation where this person he was so great with the clients, and that book of business, the clients loved him. He was good internally. It was just good, but he and I had no gel together, no vibe whatsoever. And it was really bugging me to the point that I've talked to our other executives and said, we need to fire that person. Like, I need that person to be a contributor to our leadership team as a company. It is my agency. And I never say those words as my agency, but I was feeling that. I would say it's our agency externally, but I was feeling, what are you talking about? This is my company. And you should, if I send you a text message, maybe within a day or two, you might want to text me back. You might want to try to do that. I think it's a fair expectation. And so we just didn't have the gel, and I wanted to get rid of the person, and I didn't. So you got to check. My lesson is you've got to check your ego. And I checked my ego and let it go. That person continued to succeed, stayed with the business, turned out to be really great and was doing a great job, and just not kind of what I expected. And that's okay. I think so. That self-reflection and making sure the people around you can see the value in different types of people, and they pump them up. And it's not always about the CEO getting all their cookies too. And I think that was a hard lesson for me, and one that I now, it's okay. Like, I'm now okay with it. And I've now not put pressure on myself to have all these bond connections with every single employee of the company, because not everybody wants that. And that's okay.
Thanks for sharing that, Kevin. Now, I want to switch the topic a little bit, because throughout the podcast, you mentioned quite a bit about technology. So I want to get your thoughts on that, because there's a lot of conversations right now about AI replacing people versus enhancing them. So I'm curious, where do you land on that? So given how long you've been in the industry and you've been leveraging technology so much, what does actually AI do for your company?
We're learning it as fast as everybody else is learning it. So I would say we are so excited by it. We see tons of applications of where we can be using AI. We have started using AI, but we're just at the tip of the iceberg. We think we've got so much more to do with it. In talking to our CTO just last week, we had a board meeting, and I said, look, I want to report to the board, like, what is the impact of AI? And he said, in the last quarter, we have done 4x of code development versus a normal quarter without AI. So 4 times efficiency than what we would have had. So that's a massive number. And that now translates to structurally, if we want to develop these modules and add these features into the Karma platform, how are we going to do that? What's the timeline and what's the cost? Do we need to bring on more developers? Do we need to? And so the decisions are now different. The questions are now different about how do we want to do this? And they're different versus 6 months ago. And I've had a lot of agency owners call me and ask me, what are you doing in your tech platform? How are you using AI? I share the same stories with them. And I think we're at 1%. Like, we're just not using it to its full capacity yet. And so we're going through learning and development. We've had a consultant come in and train all of our whole company on what is AI? How does it actually work? We call it the Pixies. And, he did a whole presentation that he created in AI to show us in layman's terms what happens when you put a prompt into the system. How does it come up with that answer so quickly? Where do you need to fact check certain things and where don't you? And we're getting more and more coaching now on using effective prompts. I will tell you, so in our product development group, we're seeing 4X, and our CTO thinks we're going to get to 20X quickly. So do we need to hire more full-time developers? Not looking like it. That's the downside of AI too. Now, you still need very smart people who can manage the AI and put it into existing systems. So there's lots of work to be done there. I've also seen it on the sales side of our business, for RFPs and other aspects. Often we'd tap a creative on the shoulder and say, look, I want to put together this amazing street sampling program in Los Angeles. I want you to have them on the beach. I want to have coolers that are wrapped in this logo. I want to have 10 people standing there with bucket hats on, different diversity. And I would go to creative and they would take a couple of days and they would come back to me with a nice image that I can use in a deck and an invoice for that work. And now I do that in any one of the AI platforms in less than 15 minutes. And I've got that image now and I didn't pay anything for it. I've got it faster and it was free. So AI is having an effect in many areas of our business. We actually just used AI last week to create a new Tableau reporting platform to report on one of our client programs that we would have never done before. And AI just created it. And we were all in astonishment. We sat in a group meeting last week. One of our technology guys said, guys, mind if I record it? So we recorded the meeting, and I can't remember what the topic was. At the end of the meeting, he said, you guys mind if I show you something? And he stood up and put up an infographic, cool colors, icons, roadmap of the 2-hour conversation we had. AI distilled it into a 1-page infographic that we've now shared company-wide, and it looks amazing. And it looks like I would have spent $20,000 with a consultant over 5 months to come up with this 1-pager that came out of a 2-hour discussion. The power of it is ridiculous. We're so excited for it.
That's awesome. I think everybody's feeling behind right now in the AI world, but I think that kind of answer the question, right? Everybody's behind. So we're still all figuring this out together.
Yeah.
Now, I want to dig into the pandemic era, because I believe you had a lot of challenges around that. 2 years of shutdown is brutal in literally any industry. So what did those 2 years look like for you, and what are some of the decisions you had to make, and how did you overcome it?
They were difficult, Wesley. Like, we were treading water. We thought we were basically drowning and we're going to shut the doors. So that was the answer that we felt as soon as this came to realization. This wasn't going to be a 4-week or an 8-week program called the pandemic. And so luckily, I had just got out of our office lease just the first week of the pandemic. For a variety of reasons, I approached the landlord, which I had another 3 years left on the lease. And I said, I will pay you a lump sum, 3 months right here, right now. My team wants to work from home. And this was before kind of everything came crashing. And he agreed. So that was just luck. Honestly, that was luck. We got out, and so many of my agency friends did not. And I saw a lot of agencies close. They couldn't afford the overheads. Yeah, they laid off people. But if you were in rent, the hands were still out for rent. So how did we survive? First of all, the government funding for small business to help through these times was critical. Without it, we wouldn't have survived. we did have to lay off people. We actually terminated a group of people, and then we furloughed a group of people. That was important. That allowed us to keep some of the expertise in the company without having a tremendous expense. The hardest group hit for us was our product engineering group, because they're typically very expensive people, these software developers, and we weren't developing any code because we had no money. I had 7 people. We had to let them, 6 of them go. That was really hard. And then coming out of the pandemic, we didn't bring them all back. They weren't available. And then we decided, let's just maintain our platform and not innovate for a while to see what happens there as things calm down. And that put us down a different roadway that we didn't have to add all these other resources. And now with AI, we're like, whoop, thank goodness we didn't do that. Kind of worked out. The other thing is, we took our chances internally with the existing skeleton team to do things that we hadn't done in quite some time. So earlier I referenced SOPs. Well, at one stage we had no SOPs. So we had the teams working on internal structure. So we built out our SOPs. We spent an awful lot of time talking to the 110,000 brand ambassadors, and we weren't 110 then, we were probably 70,000, but we were communicating with them and keeping them engaged. Even though we didn't have work for them, we were doing contests. We were doing, get your certifications. If you're going to serve alcohol, you got to be certified in certain regions. Get your certifications done, update your profile, put in new pictures. Like, let's just communicate, keep us relevant with you. So when this thing ends, which we all didn't know exactly when it was going to end, we would come out stronger on the other side. So that was really important for us too. I think the last thing that really saved us is one of our large clients, which was the beer business. They couldn't activate with beer. They couldn't do sampling. They couldn't do anything, but a lot of the regions allowed home delivery. Now, big brewing companies never did home deliveries before this. And so that was a new little niche that they said, you can hire a driver who's driving alone. They can go to a brewery, pick up beer and drop it off at someone's front doorstep, check for a valid ID, and they're going to pay us to do that. So we all of a sudden started growing in the second year of the pandemic. We now, our revenues are starting to escalate quite quickly, all through beer home deliveries, which we never thought we would do. And then coming out of the pandemic, our business quadrupled. And then it's been like this quarter over quarter since the pandemic. Everybody came back with a vengeance in live activations and needing people and resources. And as we would all know, a lot of people, it was hard to find people because people were used to not working. I'm just going to stay home. I'm like, at some point you're going to need money. And so there is still some of that hangover where the attitude has changed on the work. But because we're in the gig economy where we've got projects start, stop, and the brand ambassadors can select the projects they want to work on through the Karma app, we have only seen it go like this, and we don't see any shortage of talent. Where I hear other industries where they're trying to find full-time folks and do this, that, with unemployment rates, that it's challenging. It's starting to be challenging. And this looming recession talk that's been over our heads for the last year and a half, companies have not been aggressively adding people to their rosters. And so we've seen that gig economy pick up, where that full-time employment industry is slowing down or putting downward pressure.
Yeah, I do think COVID and the pandemic was probably one of the most challenging times for every business in the modern history. So I'm glad you stuck it through and get it through the end and actually grew from there. But I think every founder has a story of a moment where they were just not sure if the business can make through it. So I'm curious, throughout that moment of the pandemic, what were some of the things that you had to do to mentally to tell yourself, I've got to get through this. I've got to come out on top of it. So what are some of the advices you can give to those founders?
Well, I would say we were very fortunate. My business partner and president of our business, Kim, she led this whole thing through the pandemic. I don't think she gets enough credit for what she did, but she made very difficult decisions. Now, we as an executive group, would share in those decisions, but she led it. And she rallied the team, the existing team. She was the one to say, okay, well, which folks do we think can we furlough? Which ones do we have to terminate? We don't want to, but we have to. She worked very closely with government agencies on the funding. And so she led it. So I was lucky that I had somebody who really understood this and took this on, and proactively took it on. We didn't wait till we took a couple of punches, right? We went at it, and that was really important. I think the other key thing is we all like reduced salaries. Everybody that stayed had a less salary, and the executive team took major haircuts, and that's because we wanted to keep people going with any cash that we had, and the only way we could do that is not pay ourselves. So I know for me as an example, we just didn't pay ourselves. We couldn't do it, and so we didn't know if we were going to come out of the other side. Is the honest answer is we did not know. The beer company, after 12 months of the pandemic, saved us. It really did. And the government program saved us. So government program we applied for, beer company saying we'll do home deliveries, not foreseen, not projected. It was luck that happened. And we're very fortunate that that did. I've seen other agencies that those things didn't happen and they're out of business. The other thing that was really interesting for us is going into the pandemic, our business mix between dealing with agency companies where we would supply services to those agencies and versus dealing with brand direct. We were probably 70-30. 30% of our business came from agencies, 70% from brand companies directly. Post-pandemic, it's inverted. 70% of our revenue now comes from agencies and 30% from brand direct. And so why did that happen? Because agencies like mine went through the exact same situation with the pandemic. They fired people. They had to right size. They downsized. And when they came through the pandemic, they're like, do we need to hire all those HR people, all those recruiters? Do we need 3 people in payroll, or can we just do 1? And so they now needed a resource that was capable of delivering their staffing needs post-pandemic. And that's where we came in. So that turned out to be a great news scenario for us. And we're pretty proud of our agency partnerships today. And everybody, you know, we're Switzerland. We get to deal with as many agencies as we can. You know, we gatekeep them on the inside so they don't feel that there's any competitive issues. And because staffing is further down on the strategic level of project development, they don't feel exposed that there's a conflict because we're not talking brand strategy and activation strategy. We're talking execution. So those decisions have already been made by the time they come to us.
Yeah. How did you develop a thick skin to keep going at it and not knowing what's going to come out at the end? Is it just from experience, or what's the
well, it's experience. I would say I was in a fortunate position because I had sold my other agencies. And so I could survive and not paying myself. So I was in a fortunate position to do that. And I recognize that. As an entrepreneur, guess what I did? I started 3 more companies during the pandemic. And so I had the time because I wasn't busy to create. And so I created others. All of them are going today. I have leaders in each one of those companies. And so I don't spend time there. Predominantly, I go to board meetings and get involved with some decisions here and there. I spend all my time as CEO at Karma Casting, which is the flagship for me in my businesses. But that's how I put more energy against it, thinking you can't get a home run unless you swing the bat. And if my bat is broken with Karma, not because of me, but because of the pandemic, then I need to create another. I got to do something different because that's my next chapter. And that's exactly how Karma started. I had another medical technology company, and I was there for 10 years. I created it. I sold it to a publicly traded company. And halfway through that journey, it was a 10-year journey. At year 5, I created Karma. It was a side hustle because I wanted to swing the bat. And I wasn't sure which ball was going to be a home run ball. And so I kind of just diversified. And now Karma is my home run ball. And now I've got a couple of other ones. And we'll see where things go.
That's amazing. I want to ask you something because you sold a lot of companies and agencies in the past. And I think one thing that a lot of veterans say is have the end in mind. So I'm curious what that actually looks like in practice. Why does it matter for somebody, let's say, who not even thinking about selling a company? So what does that look like, having the end in mind? What that changes? How do you operate from like the day to day?
Yeah, it's funny. I had this conversation. It's one of my core fundamental beliefs when I'm talking as a mentor to people. I think there's entrepreneurs and there's wannapreneurs. There's a lot of people who want to be an entrepreneur. And they don't understand it because they haven't been it yet. The ability to take on risk and have everything fail is a unique skill, and it's not for everybody. But it can be. In my experience in my first company, we did not start with the end in mind. And only 15 years later, when I got to that point, did I realize we would have done things differently if I had started with that. And so with all of my other ventures now, my business plan has, where do we wind up on this thing? And, I had this conversation the other day because the person was saying to me, entrepreneurs don't always want to sell their business. And I said, well, I disagree with you. I think 100% they do. They just might not want to admit it at that point in time. And so I believe every entrepreneur wants to sell their business, whether that means they're giving up control, whether they're raising capital to grow it, whether they're actually going to want to exit. At some point, they're going to want it. That happens. It might even be handing it down to your children. I don't know. But at some point, there's a transaction that has to happen in the business, because as on a privately owned entrepreneurial company, at some point, I'm not going to be here. And so you need to put those plans into play. And each one of those scenarios is different. So in starting Karma, we wrote a plan that has the end in mind. And what is the decisions that go into that? Well, who would you sell this business to? Who would be a likely person who would want to buy your business? Persons or companies. What industry are they in? Okay, great. Well, how are they going to value your business? What metrics would those industries outside of private equity, which play in all the industries, but if you think about the industry we're in, how do they value your business? Is it going to be based on multiple of earnings? Is it a multiple of revenues? Is it because they're a client of yours and now they're sticky and reliant on you? What are the key things that you think are going to drive the valuation to get to be big of a number as you possibly want it to be? Those decisions impact literally everything you do. Just those two things. They impact how many senior people are you going to bring on the board? What experience do you want in the leadership team in that industry? What EBITDA or profit or gross margin can you charge? What kind of pricing strategies are you going to be able to charge if you need to go hit a multiple of X on the exit? With Karma, people would look at us and say, well, you're a staffing company. So as a services-based company, you're going to get a services-based multiple, which generally is about 5 times EBITDA. We're a technology company. Our whole platform is technology. And yes, we do staffing as an end result, but how we get to that is very different. And so therefore, if we're a technology company, your multiple can be anywhere from 11 to 17 to 18 times EBITDA, almost triple value versus being a services company. The problem that we would have today is we know how the value of the technology works. We see the value of how it delivers 99%. But in the future, when we try to sell this company to whoever that may be, did they care about how we do it? Do they care? And we're not sure we know the answer to that yet. What they care about is that we deliver staff. How we get there, is it relevant to them? Just get the staff well-trained, well-placed, and deliver 99% compliance, and we're good. So, even when you set those goals in terms of what's the end in mind, you got to be able to be flexible along the journey. But I think the real lesson to all of that is asking the hard questions and shaping your plan around that to be able to deliver against that. Even in the Karma world, coming out of pandemic, margins were tight. They were tight and they're still tight today. Brands want to pay less. Talent wants more money. That just puts pressure on margin. And so, if we want to have a future exit in this business, we need to figure out what pricing looks like and how do we generate margin? How do you lower costs and how do you charge more so you can have that spread and a healthy one that you can get a good multiple? Those types of questions around the end in mind yield a different behavior and a decision process today, even though you might be talking 3, 5, 10 years from now. Hopefully I've answered your question, but I'm a firm believer in starting with the end in mind. It drives behavioral change.
Wow, that's a lot of lessons to be taken away from. So, Kevin, I appreciate you so much. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the podcast, but I do have to wrap this up with one single question, although
Sure.
I would love to ask you a lot more. But if you had to restart today and rebuild an agency from scratch, what is the one single mistake that you would refuse to repeat?
One single mistake. I'd like to think, Wesley, this was a rehearsed question, but this is not a rehearsed question. There are two things that come to my mind. Partners. I think the hardest lesson I've learned is the partnership of your agency, the owners of your agency. And I've learned a tough lesson recently with a partner where you think you would know everything about that and it feels good. And, you're developing what percentage ownership will you have and I have and things like that. And it turns out not to be what you thought. And now the equity that the people have, you can't change. Really, you can't change it once you're up and running. And if I had known what I later found out back in the day, I would have done it differently. So I would say to any agency owner, you really need to spend the time and due diligence to decide if you're going to partner with someone, what does that look like? And what are the key metrics to determine that? And I would actually encourage like a sliding scale, but that's for another conversation, another day. But that's the number one thing I would do. The second thing I would do, and I only have two, is you cannot, as much as you want to, have a bench full of A+ people. You can't. It doesn't last. People leave, you get hurt, you take it personally, and it just causes noise. Go in with the plan of knowing you need some A's, some A-, and some B+ and B's, and it's okay to have that because I think that brings stability to your business. And I've had too many different experiences where go and get the A team, let's overpay. We're going to have this person, we're going to overpay versus market. And we've got these 5 amazing all-stars and we're going to launch this business. It's going to be great. And it was great for about 6 months. And then all these A personalities starting biting at each other and it just blew apart. And there was no need for us to do that. And so those would be the two lessons that I've seen over time that I would do differently on my next venture.
Well, everyone, this is your guest, Kevin, and this is the Agency Cultural Conversations. Thank you, Kevin, for being on the show.
Great. Thank you, Wesley. Take care.